Donald Trump is 80 years old. He is the president of the United States, unfortunately, and his closest personal relationship is with Natalie Harp, a psychotically obsessed millennial who follows him around printing out good news about himself to read in big print, landing herself the nickname the Human Printer. But new personal letters released this week from Natalie to Trump paint the situation as so much worse and so much weirder. You really should read them for yourself because there's really no way I can articulate how crazy they are, but we're going to give it a try. Here are some choice quotes to help paint the picture for you. You are all that matters to me. I don't want to ever let you down. I never want to bring you anything but joy. It is I who is unworthy. Thank you for being my guardian and protector in this life. You have the absolute right to cuss me out if you need be when I deserve it, because no one knows or cares about me more. Yeah. That's just a small slice of the insanity that the president's closest aide is saying to him on a daily basis, at least when she's not desperately running after his golf cart in this recently released hilarious photo. Look at Natalie Harp. Both her feet are literally off the ground. She's booking it. Her toes are pointed perfectly. She looks like Usain Bolt. I think she's insane Bolt at this time, but it's crazy. This is embarrassing. But it's also terrifying. Even the Secret Service was alarmed by the letters. They were especially alarmed by the letters. And it's not just that she's crazy. She worked for a year in direct contact with the president without a security clearance. She is a national security threat. But that's no surprise. Trump will immediately surround himself with anyone who loves him, who thinks he's the greatest, and who doesn't really ask a lot of questions. And so, of course, the person who's going to be spoon-feeding his dementia-addled brain a curated stack of good news and carrying his diapers will be always by Donald Trump's side. And that is a scary, scary reality. No wonder Trump's connection to reality is literally hanging on by a thread. And now the White House is attempting to cover it up. Today, Donald Trump and Melania are making another probably paid appearance together at the D.C. Grand Prix. Yeah, I'm sure that has nothing to do with Natalie. Absolutely it does. This is a threat to our national security. This is a threat to our sanity, which Natalie Harp has none of. And we are going to be discussing that on today's episode of On Sunday with three incredible guests. Ben Meiselas is once again joining the show. We're going to talk about Natalie. We're going to talk about independent media. We're going to talk about his new book alongside the MeidasTouch brothers, the Meiselas brothers, Brett, Ben, and Jordy, of course, WTF America. We are also joined by Sarah Matthews, who worked in Donald Trump's first administration, resigned after January 6th, and is going to tell us a little bit of the inside scoop on Natalie that you're going to want to stick around for. I'm also joined to close things off by another friend, David Hogg. We're going to talk about huge primary victories for progressives and so much more, so you're going to want to stay tuned for that. But we got lots of great guests. We got a lot of important news to talk about. If your sanity is on the verge of Natalie Harp levels, because this has been such a great week for craziness, then you are going to want to stick around as we break it all down. As we always do, it's coming up. It's you, it's me, it's three incredible guests. And as always, it's on Sunday. Ben Meiselas, thank you so much for joining me on Sunday.
Great to be here, Jack.
Ben, we have had a long week of the Natalie Harp saga, and I'm finally glad that the mainstream media is giving it the coverage that it deserves. Of course, on Meidas, on my show, on independent media channels across YouTube, we've been talking about Natalie Harp. Obviously, Senator Ossoff is the reason that the mainstream press woke up to this, but why do you think it took them this long to do real reporting on even the issues around her security clearance, things that we've been talking about for so long?
They've always ignored the things that are staring them right in the face, that this individual in the Oval Office is a felon. That's an objective fact. The individual in the office is a sexual predator. That is an objective fact, found civilly liable for sexual assault. So when I hear all of these right-wing people attacking Senator Ossoff for bringing up, again, objective facts about Natalie Harp traveling with Donald Trump, hiding in catering containers, and they're like, oh my God, that's so mean. It's like, dude, shut up. I mean, you're supporting someone who's literally a sexual predator, who's been found civilly liable for sexual assault. And with all of the mulligans that this right-wing extremist Supreme Court gives them, even they wouldn't even hear or listen to Donald Trump's petition on the civil sexual assault case. I mean, you've got a regime in power that's covering up a child sex trafficking ring, and our media just treats it like, yeah, well, that was a story from a few months ago. You know, it's the reporting that you're doing. It's the reporting that Katie Fang is doing, you know, and not just the reporting, but Katie Fang being in court, you know, on a very important Epstein Transparency Act case. People like Allison Gill who are out there doing FOIA requests. It's that I think you and others, and what we hope to do here at the MeidasTouch Network, is we're listening, we're observing. We know where the people are at right now, and what they're looking for is people who fight for them and report on these things. And corporate news is too busy, either in their consolidation efforts or in, I don't know, falling for the next distraction. And then even when they report on Natalie, Jack, their reporting is done through this both sides lens. And, you know, on the one hand, it's, should we report on this or should we not report on this? Just report on it. And they do it the way Senator Ossoff does, which is explain the contrast that this is what Trump is doing. This is what his priorities are. These are the side quests that he's on that benefit himself while the American people are suffering and having healthcare ripped away. And as you and I are recording this, we're having the highest gas prices, the highest diesel prices in American history at this time. Groceries are not affordable. Trump's talking about importing massive amounts of foreign beef from mystery sources to
won't even tell us,
and it won't even tell us where it's coming from, to destroy the business of our ranchers here. And while Trump's engaged in all of this, intentionally, maliciously inflicting pain and suffering on the American people, he's running around gallivanting with this Natalie person who's writing these bizarro letters. And I think the American people know that what we're seeing is somebody who actually hates the United States of America. This is somebody who actually hates our ranchers. He hates our farmers. He hates the people here. But what he does like to do is have some sycophantic, boot-licking, weird individual around him write him these letters and tell him that he's the greatest and chase after him. And that's wrong. And that's unbecoming, would be the nicest thing I can say of the presidency. And it's freaking weird. And it's loser behavior. And the American people are sick of this heading into the midterms. That's what I think the big story is here, John.
Yeah, I think that you're so right. And I've said it 1,000 times, especially since the Great American State Fair, that there is no one who hates MAGA more than Donald Trump. It was just last night he wrote a post about Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson and said, you know, Tucker Carlson didn't finish school, and, you know, people who don't finish school are stupid and idiots. I'm like, that is maybe the biggest slice of the MAGA pie is non-college educated voters. Donald Trump sent out his voters to die in the heat in D.C. He led his cabinet on a decoy plane just so he could be safe and protected, and then lied about it. Of course, Natalie was with him. But you bring up the facts around Natalie Harp. I think that in our reporting and what we've talked about, the idea of them having an affair is the least of all our concerns. Like, I don't think that Donald Trump's appendages work, and I don't think that's what's going on here. I'm worried about how someone can flatter their way to so much power. What is your biggest concern with the entirety of the Natalie Harp saga that we've seen unfold recently?
Who is this person? I mean, who is this individual? The more you dig deeper, the more deranged and bizarre it gets. I mean, this is someone who is by his side when there's a nuclear football around, while major decisions are being made. She's the person holding the phone, gatekeeping, world leaders reaching out. And so in the context of all of the horrific things that we've seen Donald Trump do, all of the losing that the United States has experienced, I mean, she's the main person by his side. She's being paid by the taxpayers. It was odd, to say the least, and very alarming that she would not go and get a security clearance during the requisite period of time. And who even knows what the process was for her to get the security clearance afterwards, because you can still get a security clearance expedited simply by Donald Trump saying expedited. Do we even know? I don't know one way or another what the process even was. Was there a full background check? And no, but the issue is, who are the people that are surrounding him? And he's already an individual who's demonstrated just a complete inability and unfitness to be anywhere near any positions of leadership, yet alone the most important one. And again, what this just makes, the world's watching this, Jack. I mean, here's the thing, perhaps amongst Donald Trump's 33% or 30% approval, or the people who watch state regime media, Fox, and I know they use a lot of clips, from these Sunday shows, which is fine, but perhaps there's an audience that still finds this dystopian reality show where most Americans feel like non-consensual participants being tortured in this awful season of The Apprentice that no one ever wanted to be a part of. I mean, there may be people who think that that's, or they're so, embedded in their tribal views of Republican and Democrat that they're, still go to this small South Carolina rally while Donald Trump is up there doing YMCA dances while the American people are suffering. But these are real serious times, Jack. The world views America as a loser nation right now. That's how the world sees us, that we're a bunch of losers. And you see Prime Minister Carney telling his negotiators who were with Donald Trump's people in Washington, D.C., leave right now and get back to Ottawa, as the Trump regime last minute, was Natalie around him when this was taken, who the hell even knows, apparently wanted to change the deal even more with Canada to basically say Canada can't do deals with other countries without our approval or without our consent. And Carney's like, enough, we're at a trade war now. You attack us, Canada's going elbows up. And the whole world looks at the U.S. as weak, as pathetic, as weird. You may be too young for this, Jack, but when I grew up, South Park would mock North Korea and would mock their leadership, and there would be, the South Park movies and the puppets. I don't know, if that was slightly before you, but I was probably in high school when that first South Park movie came out. So now we have Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-un's sister saying, in response to Donald Trump's behavior, posting weird memes and calling off the United States military exercises with South Korea, and saying, we cool, bro, Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un and his sister said, we're really uninterested in this discourse, and, we're focused on, our geopolitical positioning. And they sound in North Korea like the sane ones, while Donald Trump's posting meme. I can't even give you, Jack, a historical reference to the level of crazy, psychotic, lunatic behavior. And as we start off, and you're like, why doesn't the news report on it? I don't know. Is they're complicit? They're taken over. They are bending the knee. But this stuff is so obvious. The American people get it. They're like, what the hell is this? Just seriously, not a Republican, not a Democrat, not an independent issue. What the hell is this freaking madness? And it angers people.
And I'm so glad you bring up the fact that, the mainstream media is complicit, because they are. It's a takeover. And you brought up Katie Fang earlier. This is someone who is uncovering Epstein evidence because of her work. I feel like so much has been done by the independent media, whether it be on ICE, Epstein, Natalie Harp, to drive this narrative. But also after a full week, because it's now been a full week that we have been talking about Natalie Harp, and rightfully so, for all the different reasons, the distraction, the background check that wasn't there, Donald Trump's focus on things that don't matter. It's a real lesson to Democrats, isn't it, that you can actually set a news cycle. I feel like we're always so reactionary and on the back foot. What do you think the lesson here is for our messaging strategy, with one Ossoff, a rally leading to this week-long discussion of Natalie Harp?
I don't do political messaging, but I do network. That my view behind the media network is building an ecosystem, not just building a daily reactionary thing. And so an ecosystem is more than just a network. It is a way of thinking and a framework for thinking. And ultimately, how people then make their decisions politically is up to them. Let them make that. But we have to heal the infected ecosystem that has been destroyed since the 1960s, when right-wing people looked at the experience of Nixon and said, we need to create a protection racket for future Nixons. And they built that with radio. They built that when they got into people's cars and trucks, and they started pushing it. At the same time, they had the Federalist Society for decades building a legal agenda to destroy our Constitution, and they built structures. Trump didn't come out of nowhere. Trump is a vessel for a decades-long, 60, 70-year strategy to destroy the American dream and to steal it and keep it in the hands of right-wing oligarchs and turn the United States into an authoritarian nation. And it was people who didn't like the post-World War II American dream kind of overall architecture who were attacking it. So Trump, what we often fall into the trap, the communal we, is that we react to daily news, and and Trump and these egos and these personalities become the focus. But the reality is Trump is a vessel of a long plan. So the learning lesson to me is, wow, what people have seen over the past few weeks is when we can control an information ecosystem of the truth, exposing what's going on the USS Abraham Lincoln, the aircraft carriers, the Navy destroyers, expose what's going on at the bases that are taking place. Use everybody working shoulder to shoulder, the Katie Fangs, what you're doing, what Aaron Parnas is doing, what we're doing on Legal AF, what other people in this independent media space are doing across the board, and get the message out and flood the zone with the truth every damn day. The Natalie Harp coverage, the coverage of Donald Trump's apparent physical and cognitive decline, and focusing on that nobody wants to talk about. And of course, the Epstein files, as the catastrophic and unlawful war in Iran is part of a cover-up of the Epstein files as well, and then focusing on that and not letting that. So to me, the broad lesson, and this is what we talk about in WTF America, the book that we are coming out with in October, which is not an election book. It's not about how you win an election. It's not about how Democrats can message for this or that, or how this person messages or this or that. That's actually not all that interesting to me. And I'm not suggesting it's not an interesting topic, but to me, what fascinates me the most is we have to reframe the broader thinking about how we got into this mess, because if we want to get out of it, it's more than just an election cycle. We have to think that there's been a generational attack, and we need to put our country on a generational arc towards a better future. And so many of the things, Jack, we're talking about, being against people who cover up child sex trafficking rings, that shouldn't be a Democratic Republican view. Making sure our service members, our sailors, our Marines, and others are getting the stuff that they need, getting nutrition, being treated the way they deserve, that their family members are. That shouldn't be this political issue or that political issue. Calling out golden ballrooms and 21,000 stock trades and all this shouldn't be difficult stuff. So to me, Jack, that's the broader lesson, that this media ecosystem is working, and how that translates or doesn't translate into election. Political people can try to decipher that, but the healthy ecosystem has emerged. It's here, and that's what this is all telling me.
And you're going to be and have written about it in the upcoming book, WTF America. Who is it? Because I know a lot of people are going to buy it. A lot of people are going to read it. I am excited to read it. I hope I get an autographed copy. Maybe we can figure something out. But what do you want the takeaway to be? I don't want you to give away all that the book is about right now, but who is the type of person that you want to read and have a takeaway from it? Or who are the many different types of people you would like to have reading this book?
Yeah, I want people who are focused on generational change. I would say that's the big kind of message, is how the hell did we get here? Like, WTF is, I think, how we all feel. Like I wake up in the morning, I'm like, dude, what the F is this? Not as a Democrat, not as this party, not as that, just as what is actually going on? This isn't leadership. This isn't empathy. This isn't, where are the principles? Where are the values? What are we standing for? Those type, what the hell even is this? And how do we get out of this hell? And I want people to see, again, that this was that a Trump didn't come out of nowhere. You know, I'm often told, oh, you're anti-Trump, you're anti-this, you're anti. It's that he is a vessel that has laundered the worst. Mm-hmm. And we need to create infrastructures that restore the best. And we go through and explain that. We go through his tactics. We go through how we got here. The book begins by talking about Roger Ailes, the Nixon memorandum about how the right wing creates a propaganda network, how that was then translated into right wing radio, how that was the Rush Limbaughs, how that was translated into Fox, and how these other right wing platforms developed, and why that there was no counter to it. And so they had 60 years, Jack, 60 years of an open lane of pushing this crap over and over again. And right now, the MeidasTouch network's been around for 6. And so to get out of this hell, we have to think about that. Think where we are now, 6 years into this, with really 4 years of real kind of growth. So where can we be in 60 years? That gives me a lot of hope. But I also know that we need to be thinking in that way versus how do we win a specific news cycle this day or that day. We have to do the daily motions, but we have to be thinking generationally and bigger and internationally as well, because all of this is interconnected as well. There are right-wing Trumpy movements across the globe, and Trump followed the Orban playbook to a T. That's where this was tested out first. We talk about that in the book as well.
Yeah, our ideas need to be bigger, and we need to be building bigger infrastructure. It's why I'm so proud to be working with y'all and what Meidas is doing, and what the orbit around Meidas with Katie. You said Legal AF, of course, Aaron. It's really incredible to watch it play out. We're building something big. And I'm just,
by the way,
it
wasn't a mistake. You and Aaron, you know, we were doing this, you know, you and Aaron Parnas together 5 years ago. And so again, you don't come out of nowhere. Aaron Parnas doesn't come out of nowhere. I don't come out of, you know what I mean? So it's like, we have to then, you and Aaron and others then mentor the next group. And then that is the legacy. That to me is what the book is about, but that's what our mission is about, that legacy.
We'll make sure to get out and pre-order it. WTF America. I'm very excited. I'm going to get my signed copy. So I'm just going to make sure that we ship it around, because Brett and Jordy need to get some ink on that. But Ben, thank you so much for a second time, a returning guest, for joining me on Sunday.
Absolutely great to be here, Jack.
So incredible to be joined by my friend once again, Ben Meiselas, on Sunday. Please do make sure you are pre-ordering a copy of their incredible book, WTF America. I'm really excited to read it. I sympathize a lot with that title. I'm sure the rest of us do as well. But before we get into the next story, before we have our next guest, I want to start with something else. If you're turning 65 or you're helping somebody who is, Medicare is about to get handed to you. Dozens of plans, multiple parts, labeled with letters, deadlines attached to penalties you pay for the rest of your life, and people described it like it's a form you fill out. It's a design choice. Nothing that complicated is complicated by accident, which is why I'm pointing you to Chapter. They're the only Medicare advisors that compare every plan nationwide to help you find the one that actually fits. Independent, a real licensed person on the phone who looks at your doctor, your prescriptions, and what actually matters to you to find the plan that best fits your life. And they're honest, not paid to just push certain plans. If you're already on the right plan, they'll tell you straight, which is not what you expect to hear from anybody in that business. If there's a better plan out there, they'll help you switch. Free help under 20 minutes, zero pressure. 417-373-3509 or the link in the description. Stop staring at the envelopes. Call Chapter today. And speaking of things that are far too complicated for no reason, the way that the right-wing media is framing this Natalie Harp situation as the Democrats attacking women, coming after them, is just ridiculous and purposeful deflection and obfuscation from the real truth. And that real truth is what I'm excited to talk about with Sarah Matthews right now. Sarah Matthews, thank you so much for joining me on Sunday.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, we've had a crazy, I would say week, but it's been a couple of weeks of dysfunction within the White House. And I really couldn't think of anyone better to come and join me to talk about the resignations, the status of kind of Carolyn Leavitt and Donald Trump's relationship, and also the big story of the week, which has been Natalie Harp, someone that you actually knew during your time working in the administration. What was your first meeting or kind of experience with Natalie Harp like? And did you kind of expect to see her relationship with Trump play out the way it has over the past couple of years?
Okay, so before I joined the Trump White House during the first administration, I worked on Trump's 2020 reelection campaign for a year as deputy press secretary. And then they eventually moved me over for like the last 7 months or so of the first administration. But during that time when I was working for the campaign, we had a bunch of campaign surrogates who we would, do events with, help write op-eds for, all that kind of stuff. And Natalie Harp was one of our campaign surrogates because she had credited Right to Try, a piece of legislation that Trump had signed into law, as saving her life because she had survived bone cancer. And so that was how I knew her, was as a campaign surrogate. And I remember that she would DM me on Twitter all the time. And we hadn't really even met, but like I would just get all these DMs from her that were very nice and praiseworthy. If she would see some quote that I had in some article defending the president, things like that. And it came off to me that she was just very eager to help the campaign and that she really wanted to ingratiate herself within Trump world and connect with people. And I think we might have met like once. It might have been at like the 2020 virtual convention. But I really I think most of our correspondence was over Twitter DMs, but I actually don't have access to the DMs anymore because she blocked me after I don't know if it was after I resigned on January 6th or if it was after I testified before the January 6th committee, but I have since been blocked. And so I do not have access to the DMs, but from what I remember, that it was just her DMing me, and it just came across that she was very eager. And I think that now it's just really interesting to see her trajectory of she was able to break through and become part of Trump world, and obviously rose the ranks fairly quickly to now be one of the president's closest aides.
I think that's the thing that people find so interesting about this story is that obviously the Trump world really values loyalty, except, when Trump is the one making decisions, then there's no value of loyalty and he doesn't care, and he'll fire the fuck out of you and just throw you under the bus. But it is a, kind of a cult of personality around the loyalty towards Trump. But she seems to have an exceptional level of loyalty. Was this something that was kind of ever discussed? It's like, wow, this person she is really about it, because, we were talking before we hopped on about how Natalie Harp is like sprinting after Trump in photos in which she's got really great form. So good for her. Great form, but also like hopping in the trunk of SUVs. Was this something that was ever talked about? Obviously, you're outside of that world now, but was this something that you kind of ever heard through the grapevine about this person who was really passionate about Trump?
Yeah, it's something that it wasn't something when I was part of Trump world. It's all been post and since me kind of, basically becoming a black sheep and being exiled from Republican politics. But I have reporters tell me that they have contacts within the White House who have basically said as much about Natalie Harp to them, that they've leaked things saying that, she has this extreme devotion to the president that is a little alarming to them. And so that's kind of how I've heard it through the grapevine. And then I think it's just very apparent when, she's always by his side, which isn't necessarily abnormal because obviously every president has an executive assistant. But I look at the first administration, and the people who occupied that role were folks like Nick Luna and Madeleine Westerholt. And there wasn't that same narrative around them and their dedication to the job. I believe that they all are dedicated to their jobs, but I just think that obviously now that we're learning about how Trump took her on the other plane after he switched Air Force One to be on the military plane, and how she writes him these adoring love letters that even alarm Secret Service and sprints after him in the golf cart. I mean, it's a level of dedication that only kind of, I feel like, rivals to me, like if you watch Veep, Gary from Veep, it's kind of that same energy a bit. And but I will say, I do feel sorry for her that she's being put in this position, because I do think that Trump is exploiting her and her devotion to him. And reading that letter, it did make me, it honestly made me sad more than anything, reading it, because I think that, it is sad to think that when you're that devoted to a job or a president, in that way, it seems like something might be just a little off with her. And so it makes me sad that I think the president has exploited her in this way and put her in this position a little bit. Because we know that from reporting, that he goes around saying things like, all of you guys are going to leave me and make money, but Natalie will never leave me.
It's emblematic of MAGA in a sense that Trump is just like truly revels in the fact that his cult is so dedicated. And I remember on July 4th when he was directing people back to, it was his big speech, and they were going to be out in a thunderstorm surrounded by metal. And he's like, well, I need a crowd, so please do go out and possibly die for me. The visual needs to look good. But the devotion, it kind of does, the wacky devotion kind of does go both ways. You saw certainly the MS Now reporting about how Natalie Harp has been handling classified documents, presumably, and at least communicating with world leaders without a security clearance for at least a year in the White House. What do you make of that as someone who I'm sure went through the same process that she avoided? And how do you think she was able to avoid that process?
That blows my mind, that she is one of the people that foreign leaders reach out to get in contact with the president, and doesn't have a security clearance. If someone that close to the president, anyone in the West Wing, needs to have a top secret security clearance. And that was something that I certainly went through. And I know that they can fast track it. I know when I joined, they fast tracked my background check and all of these things. And it makes zero sense to me how she was able to get away with it. I just think it speaks to how Trump is always breaking norms and formalities that have applied to every other previous president. But it's a national security risk to have anyone that close to the president who hasn't been fully vetted. It's why I don't even like how he has also been using outside advisors to do jobs like negotiating the Iranian peace negotiations. It's like, we shouldn't be relying on Jared Kushner, even though Jared Kushner did once have a security clearance, was in the first Trump administration. But we shouldn't be relying on outside advisors for government work. There should be people who are properly vetted, who have passed background checks and obtained these security clearances, handling that sort of something of that much importance and classified information. So it just speaks to how Trump has, I think, kind of flipped what we know of how a president's, the executive branch should operate. And I think that should concern Americans. And that's the larger story here when it comes to Natalie Harp. Did I ever think that the president and Natalie Harp were having an affair? No.
His stuff doesn't work. But and he's also not into girls. He's not into girls that old. I think we know from the Epstein files. So
And I wish that more Republicans would be outraged about that. And instead of Natalie Harp being in the news, I wish they were more focused on the fact that the president's name is all over the Epstein files, which have not still fully been released. But the reason we're talking about Natalie Harp, I think, is because of that plane story. That's why Senator Ossoff invoked her name, because her name was in the news already, because of it being that he only took a few people on this plane. She happened to be one of them, and he left very senior officials and cabinet officials on the decoy plane. And so, but it just speaks to the larger narrative that Trump has surrounded himself with unqualified sycophants in this second administration. And these are the people he's listening to. We know that Natalie Harp is the gatekeeper of information when it comes to him, that people go to her to get things in front of him, and that she is feeding him things like AI slop that he posts on True Social, like that racist video of the Obamas depicting them as monkeys. This is someone who has the ear of the president and is very close to him. And it is wild to me that she did not have did not have a security clearance for the last year and a half.
And that's why I struggle with, and I don't have a lot of sympathy for MAGA, but for someone who has such the influence that she does, like I don't have sympathy for the criticism directed at a government employee making $160,000 a year who's pushing the president's worst impulses. There was that tweet that Marjorie Taylor Greene posted back in November of her texting Trump and an aide saying, "Hey, why don't you release the files? Why are you going after me?" And the aide was Natalie Harp, who said the Epstein files hoax, right? So she's been on the worst side of all the worst issues. And you're right about the plane story really being what kicked it off, because it represents the Trump delusion and distraction, but also maybe more importantly, the national security concerns that come along with having a president so out of touch with reality that his brain is very easy to shape. And that's the question that I think is the most important in asking with Natalie Harp is, how did someone get this close to the president? How does someone have this much power? Does that mean other people do as well? We saw it with Elon. We've clearly seen it with the influence that the Israelis have in convincing Donald Trump to go to war on Iran. You spend some time around Donald Trump, obviously. What do you make of where his brain was at a few years ago versus now? Because there's clearly a decline there.
Yeah, I've said this before. I think that losing the 2020 election permanently broke his brain. He was always a broken man. But I think that really, it's been irreparable, where he psychologically cannot handle being called a loser. And then losing to someone that he perceived as weak as Joe Biden just broke him. And I do think, too, that in the first administration when I was there were a lot of people who had their reservations about him, myself included, but we went to go work for him because we wanted to serve the American people. And we did believe in some of the policies, and we wanted to help steer this country in the right direction and give him good guidance. And you don't have that in this second administration. You don't have people who I believe are there to serve the American people. They are so blindly loyal to him, either because they are crazy sycophants, or because they only care about themselves and their ambition and access to power and these things. So I think that you get in this second administration, that's why there has been so much more controversy. And I thought that we had it bad in the first administration, but in the second administration, he's pushing things that he wouldn't have been able to get away with in the first administration, because at least he had more people there who were willing to check him and call him out and tell him no. And I don't think that you have that in this second term.
You talk about things that he's able to get away with. Donald Trump, it seems, sleeps at almost every event that he attends at this point, if it's happening during the day. And, the first time he fell asleep, or the second or the third or the fourth, it was a big event. I don't think that's even the case anymore. It's become, so normal to us. Was there ever a moment that you saw him sleeping during the day, or is this a whole new thing as the decline gets worse?
Yeah, when I was working for him, I really felt like the man was the Energizer Bunny. I thought he could just go, 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 go. And you can document the decline, because when I was working for him, you look at the number of rallies that he was doing around the country. He would do 3 a day, especially in the height before the 2020 election, in those last few months there. And he is obviously not doing that now. You look at his schedule, there's not as much on there publicly, and he's not doing as many rallies. And, some may attribute that to the security concerns, which valid, that is something obviously Secret Service has to factor in now, given the assassination attempts. But I think that you're not seeing a schedule quite as packed anymore, because there is a decline there, which makes sense. The man's in his 80s. And I think we're also seeing cognitively the decline there too, and it seems to be more rapid because we don't talk about that enough either. Obviously, during Joe Biden's presidency, there was so much scrutiny on his physicality of, the kind of shuffling that he would do, or if he would trip up his words. But we don't hold that same scrutiny for Trump. When Trump fumbles his words constantly, and we're never talking about it. Yeah, and then he's falling asleep in these cabinet meetings or these Oval Office pressers, and you're like you said, it's not really getting the same coverage, which is quite interesting to me. Even though I feel like we are kind of witnessing very similar situations here.
You bring up the kind of empty schedule. Melania Trump has the same thing at this point. I think we've seen her for, I think the last number was 36, 37, or 38 days so far this year. She made a joke earlier in the week, kind of felt like kind of a quip about Natalie Harp in the conversation, saying, did you miss me? I'm back. What do you make of that relationship? Was that a question or as much of an open secret around the White House? Obviously, in the first administration, there was more time when they were in public together. But was that ever kind of something bubbling below the surface of their relationship, maybe being a little off? It seems like it's exacerbated in the past couple of years, certainly post the Stormy Daniels trial. But was that something that you heard of in the first administration?
Yeah, it's so funny because when I was working on the campaign for a year and then at the White House the last 7 months of the first admin, I met, the vice president. I met almost, every cabinet official, all these things at different events. I met members of the first family, met all of them at one point or another. The only person I never met was Melania Trump. I never met the first lady, even though I was the deputy spokesperson for the president on his campaign and then in the White House. And I think that that's pretty telling. That kind of sums it up, where it was this known thing that she was just not around and she didn't want to be around. She didn't want to stay at the White House. She thought the White House was old and falling apart, and she wanted to, be in New York and do her own thing. And I think she does have different things that she's passionate about. She's done a lot when it comes to foster care, and I give her credit for that. That's why she showed up at the White House, because it was part of her foster care work that she did. That's why she was at the White House this past week. But I have to admit that the timing is a little suspect with all of the Natalie Harp things happening in the news and floating around, that she decided to make an appearance. And I will admit that I also thought that her joke was kind of funny, acknowledging it. But we know too that it's been reported that Melania gets paid for showing up at events when they were on the campaign trail, which is crazy to think that you have to pay your own wife to show up somewhere. But I wonder if her rate has gone up after all of this news, because I'm sure she doesn't like any of this being out there, whether or not it's true, of if there is something inappropriate happening between Trump and Natalie Harp. Again, I don't think so, but I just think it's a bizarre relationship. But I can guarantee that Melania does not like that being out there in the news, just as she didn't like when everything came to light with Stormy Daniels, because she thought it was embarrassing, as it is. That is embarrassing for any wife to be put in that situation. And so I think that I imagine her rate has gone up now, given all of the news happening this week.
Yeah, maybe that's why they're doing the crypto scheme, is to be able to pay Melania off, and that's why they're bringing in Bezos for round 2 of the little series on her on the White House. I don't know if you're not gonna tune into the Amazon original on Melania first few months of the White House, are you? I don't think many people are. I want to talk about the other weird relationship dynamics that Donald Trump has in his White House right now. Carolyn Leavitt's resignation was obviously a really big deal, and the fact that there's been no real conversation about who's coming next as the White House press secretary really shows that this was unexpected. What do you make of not just her resignations, but all of the resignations? Do you think this is there's no future in this White House, let me make a little money, we're tired of working for Trump? What do you make of the mass departures we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think that Caroline Leavitt says that her departure is because she wants to spend more time with her young children. She just had a baby. And that makes total sense in the way of, I cannot fault any mother for that. And this is one of the most demanding jobs in the world, being White House press secretary. but especially for this president to be White House press secretary. And we know that he leaned on her and that she was one of the closest people in his orbit. But I have to say that she could not have timed this better. And I know Caroline from when we worked together in the first administration. I was deputy press secretary when she was an assistant press secretary. And she is incredibly smart. And so I think that she could not have timed this better, because that is why we're seeing a lot of other people head for the door, is because they see the writing on the wall. They see that this is a lame duck president who's deeply unpopular, and that Republicans are likely going to be obliterated in the November election. And so I think that they don't want to be there for the second half of this administration, because they know it's going to be complete hell.
Yeah.
Trump is going to have to face accountability for all of the things he's done, and the corruption, and it'll be all these investigations if Democrats take control of the House and potentially the Senate. And I think that they don't want to be there for that. And so they're thinking, I'm going to get out now. And with Caroline, she's able to get out on good terms with the president, which isn't always the case for that senior of officials in his White House. It's usually, him souring on people and them being fired. And with her, it seems like she kind of orchestrated it perfectly. And it also just happens to coincide with her wanting to spend more time with her young children. But I do think that she will be very hard to replace, because like her or not, I think she was an effective press secretary for him in the way he wants a press secretary to do the job.
Lying a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that she was able to do the job in a way that he was happy with, which he is hard to please. And so when you're White House press secretary, you're basically catering to an audience of one. Traditionally, that role is supposed to be informing the American people on administration policy. But in the Trump White House, it is just pleasing one man's ego and, defending the indefensible, lying with conviction, and having the stomach for it. And she proved to be able to do all of those things. And I think there are plenty of people who are eager to do the job and want the job, but I just there's no clear front runner in my eyes, even though I know Scott Jennings' name is kind of the one that is seeming to be the most prominently out there. But I think that Trump likes having a man, or likes having a woman in that role over a man usually. And so if it's Scott, I would worry, if I were Scott, if you accept that job, are you going to be Sean Spicer 2.0, where Trump eventually sours on you?
He could get some filler and some Botox and maybe clean it up. I think it's always a possibility for Scott. I want to close on Carolyn Leavitt, because I think you have great insight on something that you brought up about the accountability. And this is two questions here. Given that Carolyn Leavitt was very much a part of the cover-up of the Epstein files, did you ever attend any meetings in the Situation Room without the president being there, like Carolyn Leavitt did with J.D. Vance and Kash Patel and Todd Blanche, to discuss how to cover up the files? And then do you think that that's something in the back of her mind as she's leaving this White House, worrying about what oversight is going to look like with a Democratic Congress, and how she'll get looped into the criminality of this cover up as well?
Yeah, no, I was never part of any conversations related to the Epstein files during the first administration. I don't think it wasn't as prominently in the news, and that's a fault on. I think that I wish it would have been something that we were talking about more then, and even during the Biden administration, and. But I know that I think because there was ongoing, cases and all these things, that it really, like, the files couldn't necessarily be released during those times. So it wasn't as much on our radar as something that we were managing. But I think that for your second question about if she's worried about the accountability she'll face with a potential Democratic Congress, most definitely.
Yeah.
She should be. As should all of the people in this White House and in this administration. They need to face accountability. And I hope that that's a motivating factor for people heading to the polls this November, is obviously being unhappy with all of Trump's broken campaign promises, whether that be, I won't start a war in the Middle East, I'm going to bring prices down, I'm going to release the Epstein files. But also there needs to be accountability for this unprecedented corruption that we are witnessing. And, I want accountability into everything related to ICE, to the Epstein files. There's so much that they deserve to be rightfully questioned on. And so, yeah, if I were her, that's definitely something I would be worried about.
But that was a stunning story, right? When it came out that she was in the Situation Room, you could never have been imagined being pulled into one of those meetings without the president there, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, no, that is a kind of a stunning thing. There's certainly like conversations that don't necessarily always have to rise to the president, and need his input on. Like, I know we had plenty of strategy sessions with the chief of staff during my time at the White House on, different topics. But that is something that is very interesting to think that the vice president was leading that conversation without the president present of how are we going to spin this and handle this crisis.
Yeah, and especially in the Situation Room. Truly, truly wild shit, but truly wild shit continues to unfold every single day at the White House. Appreciate you joining me. And let's see what happens with Press Secretary Part 2. Maybe Natalie vying for the job right now. Probably not, but we'll see. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Always so great to get the inside scoop. And Sarah Matthews, a little indication about how the Melania and Trump relationship has been going for some time now. Quite interesting. And we are certainly going to be covering that more on the show. Speaking of relationships that are rocky, David Hogg has created a rocky relationship between himself and Democrats who don't want to do what is right in this moment, those who would rather not hear anyone call them out, establishment figures who are afraid of change. David Hogg has not been. He has been quite vindicated in his calls, and that is why I am so excited to have my friend back on the show, or, he's been on my show, but the first time on Sunday. It's going to be a great interview. Let's get into it with David Hogg. David Hogg, thank you so much, man, for joining me on Sunday.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
Well, you have done some incredible work since the beginning of the Trump administration, which few on our side of the aisle can really say. There's been a lot of capitulating to Trump. There's been a little half-assed fighting. But from the outset, you realized that it was time for a generational change and a different approach. That's looked like supporting progressive challengers, progressive candidates. Your organization, Leaders We Deserve, has done such an incredible job doing that. I want to have a broader conversation about where the Democratic Party needs to go. But I just want to start by giving you the floor to tout some of the huge wins that y'all have seen recently.
Yeah, well, more recently, after I was kicked out of the DNC for daring to say that we need to challenge geriatric asleep at the wheel Democrats that are failing to meet the moment and can do little more than just continue to take corporate PAC money. We went out there and announced our first incumbent challenger, Donovan McKinney, was going to be running against Sri Thanedar, and he just won. Despite being outspent, Donovan just won, defeating Sri Thanedar as our first incumbent challenger that we announced, and that's great momentum. And this cycle, we've actually seen more Democratic incumbents lose in their primaries than pretty much any in the past 50 years, which is a huge upset. We've seen Congress have the most retirements as well of any cycle in the past 100 years. So generational, it's not a question of whether or not generational change will come. It is here, and it's here to stay. And it's showing up demanding that Democrats do better in our safe seats and they're embracing an actual culture of competition that says it's not enough just to sit in your seat and say that you're against Donald Trump. You have to actually talk about how you're for things like Medicare for all, how you're for things like rejecting corporate PAC money and standing up for your community and not special interests like AIPAC.
Yeah, and you really caused a stir, which I think anyone who has been paying attention found a little ridiculous, when you compared AIPAC and their influence over our politics, which is becoming less and less so every day, to what the NRA had in terms of kind of a stranglehold over our politics. There were people who were saying that was a ridiculous comparison, that was unfair. I think you were right on. Can you say more about that comparison?
Yeah, look, it's not that complicated. After the shooting at my high school, my classmates and I were told that we cannot talk about the NRA, that they're too powerful, that we couldn't defeat them. And many in the establishment were afraid to go against them. They were afraid of their own shadow. They were afraid to stand up for the basic humanity of kids dying in their schools because an organization like the NRA was going out there and saying that somebody's purported right to an AR-15, like the 19-year-old that shot and killed 17 of my classmates and teachers, was more important than the right of our classmates and teachers to survive the classes they were teaching or were learning in. And thankfully, because young people showed up and we had some courageous Democrats out there standing with us, we had courageous parents out there standing there with us as well, we were able to take on the NRA and defeat them. And they've become increasingly irrelevant in our politics. Now we see, what's striking to me is how similar the things that I've heard about AIPAC since I started working more in electoral politics sound to what I heard about the NRA, where people said you can't talk about them, you can't criticize them, just fill out your position paper for AIPAC and be totally, just move on, don't think about it, and just go stick with the party line and don't talk about this horrific issue, even as we know kids are dying in Gaza, right? With American-made arms that our government is authorizing to go over there. And that's why I made that comparison, because I don't think that we should differentiate if it's American-made guns that are killing kids here in the United States or American-made arms and bombs that are killing kids in Gaza, in part because our government is helping to fund what the Israeli government is doing over there. I don't think it's that complicated. And unfortunately, some people don't agree with that. And I think one day, as people say, like one day everybody will have been against this, right?
Yeah.
I think people will come along, but unfortunately, there's just some people that are not there right now.
Well, someone that we have, both supported a lot in terms of, progressive candidates across the country. You talk about Michigan, you talk about Donovan, who's incredible. You talk about Will, who also won really handedly in his primary. But, Abdul Al-Sayed is also a person who I think has brought to the forefront this idea of, I think he was the first one to say it, of course, not the first one to show it, but a predictability in our politics, right? We want to be able to predict what our politicians are going to do based on a value set that they have. Like, obviously, Zoran Mamdani has lived that governing theory of predictability. Everything he does is around affordability, and really maybe more so than that, access to New York, access to community, access to living. But Abdul talked about that predictability. And when you have a universality in your values, you're very predictable. You're going to say, I don't want kids to die in America. I don't want kids to die abroad. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Why is it that the Democratic, too many in the party, have not been able to understand that universality, do you think?
I think because we have too many leaders that base their leadership and their decisions around incentives instead of morals. And thinking about what is the actual right thing to do. The reason why people didn't stand up to the NRA for so long wasn't because they weren't aware of how horrific the epidemic of gun violence was in the United States. It's that we have had leaders for far too long in our party that say, you know what, I'm going to compromise on this issue and this issue and this issue because I really care about, this one thing. And that's just how I think that I need to get elected, when the reality is we need to go out there and have our decision matrix be one thing: what is right and what is wrong, and tell people and clearly make the case for arguing that, a 19-year-old's unfettered access to an AR-15 is something that nobody should be in support of, especially when they threaten to shoot up a high school. And what we're trying to do at Leaders We Deserve is change that. Even if there are elected officials out there where the only way they're going to make a decision is if they're forced into making the right decision, I don't want this to even be optional for Democrats that are in safe seats to do the right thing. I want it to effectively be required for them to be in power, because oftentimes they're making decisions that are against their constituents' interests, that they're only able to stay there because special interests come in and continue to gaslight their own constituents through massive amounts of spending into trying to convince them that they're actually for their interests, that those Democrats are for their interests, even as their cost of living goes up, even as their quality of life goes down, and they see the American dream evaporate before their eyes. And what we're trying to do at Leaders We Deserve is take politicians that are taking support from AIPAC or corporate PACs and make that money, which is their biggest asset, like it's in some ways similarly as it was for the NRA, and make that their biggest liability. And say, look, if you're going to go out there and take millions of dollars in corporate PAC money, like Stephen Lynch has, for example, which is a race that a lot of people are sleeping on in Massachusetts right now, that's going to be much bigger of a liability than it is any potential benefit to you. Because unfortunately in politics, if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that there are no carrots in politics. There are only differently sized sticks.
Yeah.
And we're happy to come in and challenge people that are failing to meet the moment, especially when they're in safe seats where there is no argument to be made for why a Democrat in a safe seat should be voting with Republicans. There isn't, right?
No,
and we want to be there to counter that and say, we're going to actually challenge people who go out there and take corporate money and ensure that we have somebody who actually represents their district and the values of the American people and their interests and not special interests.
You talk about those differently sized sticks. I was talking with Governor Gavin Newsom last week about exactly what you just said there, which is the fact that AIPAC has become a liability for anyone taking their money. And it's funny. It doesn't matter how much you can spend. In fact, it's kind of like the correlational relationship. Like if you're spending more, it's actually worse for you with AIPAC, and they've wasted a lot of money. But I asked him if he had any control of how the 2028 primary was going to play out in terms of the rules that we set, if he would like to see AIPAC money be something that we just say no to. Foreign lobby money broadly, something that we should be saying no to. There should be no more influence of foreign lobbies on our politics, especially in the Democratic Party. That's ridiculous. And he said that he thinks that it won't even be a conversation because people will be too afraid to take it. How would you like to see, if you were running the DNC right now, that primary set up in terms of how money is allowed to be spent?
I mean, what I would say is that if they're going to be super PACs of any form, frankly, that want to intervene in those primaries, that the DNC is going to actively work, if they're going out there and clearly trying to go out there, and if these special interests are out there trying to influence these primaries by spending massive amounts of super PAC funding. I mean, there are things that the DNC could do where they say, you know what, if you're getting clearly support from some form of a massive corporate super PAC that is clearly aligned with like where you're trying to go out there and explicitly try to get them by saying, oh, I'm for all these corporate special interests, say, all right, you're not going to be on the debate stage, right? Like there are things that the DNC can do, but the bigger thing is, regardless of the rules and whether or not the DNC changes them, which in my experience, they only like to change them to benefit the people inside of there. What I would say is that we need to go out there, regardless of what the rules are at the DNC, and make this an issue for candidates and have candidates know if they're going to go out there and get tons of money from a corporate super PAC or a special interest like AIPAC, that is potentially going to be spending tens of millions of dollars for them, that there's going to be other candidates that call them out for that on the debate stage and say, I'm actually for the people. And you can tell that because you look at who's funding me and look at who's funding you, right? Where your interests and the people that are funding you are fundamentally are against the interests of the American people. They're against the interests of Democrats, and that needs to be made a liability. So regardless of what rules the DNC has and whether or not they change them, the better thing that we can do is ensure that we make any form of massive spending from these corporate special interests a bigger liability than it is an asset.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, what Democrats think about a lot in their campaigns right now isn't even necessarily who's spending money on their behalf, but who's going to come in against them, right? This is what you see with crypto, or this is what you see with the oligarchs. This is what you see with big tech, with data centers. This is certainly what you see with foreign lobby money. It's who's going to come in against me. Do you think that that fear is melting away a little bit when you have organizations like yours or, more independent media bringing attention to this huge spending where maybe it wouldn't have been a consideration of voters before in the campaign? Do you think that the money being spent against someone is becoming less of a fear in how members of Congress are voting, or many in the party are carrying themselves?
I think it is. I think that fear is always going to be there because politicians are inevitably cowards more often than not. Like they just work on, what fear is their number one guiding principle, unfortunately, more often than not than anything. And it's fear of getting kicked out of power. And I think because we're coming in and actually helping to show candidates, no, you can go up against these special interests, you can stand for something, and you have the possibility of still winning. That is what's really changing the calculus here, because people want to be with winners. And what they're seeing is AIPAC is not winning. People like a winner. AIPAC used to be a winner. Increasingly, they're not. And we just saw this with Matt Little, who was outspent in Minnesota by AIPAC affiliated groups by over $3.5 million. And he still won by double digits in that race. And I was out knocking doors with him. And it's because he had the support of the people on the ground. And frankly, the support of the Minnesota DFL, the Democratic Party there, that he was able to overcome a lot of that super PAC spending. And with that, too, we're seeing a lot of instances like we just saw in California, I think it was last night, and elsewhere, where even when AIPAC does come in, they continue to not succeed more and more. And that's in part because of the democratic ecosystem, the progressive ecosystem, developing more independent media like you've talked about, Jack, for sure, because people are now just way more aware of what's going on here. But it's also because groups like Justice Democrats, the Working Families Party,
Yeah.
Leaders We Deserve, and others are more first of all, we exist, obviously, and we're more coordinated than we ever have been. And there's grassroots donors across the country that are supporting us. Like at Leaders We Deserve, we don't take a dime of corporate PAC money. And that enables us to go out there and back people like Patrick Roth, who's running against a guy, Stephen Lynch, who's been in Congress for 25 years, who has voted against the Affordable Care Act, voted to give ICE billions of dollars and more funding, voted for the Laken Riley Act, and has not really been seriously challenged in basically a decade or more here. And it enables us to go and spend tons of money in support of somebody like Patrick without them having to compromise their values and say, actually, yeah, I'm going to reject the influence of corporate PAC money. I'm going to reject the influence of APAC and stand up for my constituents. And that's only because we have so many small dollar donors that we're able to have that independence. You know, after we supported, as you know, Jack, we were Zoran's largest organizational funder in the primary. And I got so much shit for that, you know, from people that historically had supported us that were, you know, some of our bigger funders. And one of them even called me, even though they had given us over $100,000 to go and explicitly try to find candidates that will resonate with young people. And despite the fact that Zoran got 3 times the 18 to 24-year-old turnout of young people, that donor called me up and said, I'm not giving you, you know, several $100,000 a cycle because I don't agree with your candidates anymore. And if you're like that, you don't really want candidates who resonate with young people. You want candidates who resonate with your agenda and not necessarily young people. And the reason we're able to tell somebody like that to take a hike is because the vast majority of our money comes from people that give, you know, $20 a month at leaderswedeserve.com to support our work so that we can have the independence and go out there and support somebody like Zoran and not be bossed around by any major donor in any way, shape, or form, and actually support the candidates that young people and a lot of older people want, that are responsive to their needs and interests instead of special interests. And that's why that brings me obviously to the 8th district, where we have an election coming up on September 1st in Massachusetts, where everybody's talking about Markey. Everybody's talking about Markey right now. They're all talking about Seth Moulton in that race. I don't think Markey is the incumbent that's really in danger here, to be honest with you. I don't think running to the right of a popular progressive like Ed Markey is going to be a winning strategy. What I do, the incumbent in Massachusetts that I do think is in danger, though, is Stephen Lynch, who is running, who's being challenged by a progressive voting rights attorney who's for Medicare for all, who's for universal child care and rejecting corporate PAC money. And people have been sleeping on this race. They haven't been paying much attention to it, but this is one we can absolutely win that we know in our most recent poll is down to single digits.
Mm-hmm. It's an important race for people to check out. I do implore people to go, and we're going to be speaking with Patrick on the show as well. I got 2 quick questions for you. I know you're a busy guy, but you bring up something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is people want a winner, right? How much do you think the word electability is going to matter in 2028, though?
To be honest with you, I think that this may sound weird, but I think the biggest predictor of how much people talk about that is probably going to be the state of the economy. Mm-hmm. And I think that the worse that things get economically for the people, the less they're going to be talking about affordability. I mean, I don't think that it would have been nearly as easy for Barack Obama to get elected in 2008 if you didn't have the recession that was happening at the same time, right before that. That drove people to a point of really wanting such radical change. And I think the better question is, Jack, that I would like to pose to you is like, what do we mean by electability?
Yeah. Well, it's usually what the establishment thinks is electable, right? Because I think it's a word that doesn't really have a lot of meaning anymore.
Because I think usually it fits into one of 2 categories. It's used as an excuse to back milquetoast people who are backed by special interests that can make these consultants tons of money, but not actually help the people, right? That they're actually being elected to try to help, theoretically. Or it's used as an excuse against women and marginalized people and minorities to say that they can't be elected when we know that's bullshit. Like they can be, we can have them go out there and make the case. And I think far too often that argument is just a self-fulfilling prophecy, because I think the only thing that we should be thinking about when it comes to electability is 2 things. Who is funding a candidate? Is it special interest? And what are they actually saying? Are they saying things that resonate with the people? Or are they saying, you know, I'm gonna finally be the candidate that is brave enough to stand up to the voters and for the billionaires and for the special interests? Because that's really what people want. Because increasingly, that's what it sounds like these consultants in DC want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's the reason that, and this is my last question for you, because you've been a part of many a media frenzy covering what you have to say. What do you make of the media frenzy around Hassan Piker right now and his role on a couple of campaign trails for lots of progressive challengers?
To be honest with you, I find it kind of weird. Like, he's a streamer. This guy is not an elected official. And there's a lot of elected officials out there that are saying incredibly horrible thing. Like, look at this Andy Biggs conversation, right? Like, you have two candidates, one who's a huge Islamophobe and one who is clearly an anti-Semite. And we can't seem as a party to acknowledge that both of those things are really, really bad, right? And I think that it's fascinating that people are so obsessed with a streamer that the median voter knows nothing about. You know, that's not to diss Hassan. I think he would probably agree with me generally that, like, they don't know who he is. And I think it speaks to the fact that a lot of moderates in our party don't have an actual vision that they are fighting for other than the center, because they're constantly repositioning themselves on the political spectrum to say, you know, I'm going to be in the middle, but the middle is always changing. And instead, what people are looking for is somebody that actually offers a new vision. And that's part of why I think that there's nuance in the conversation about what generational change really looks like, because what it doesn't look like is Seth Moulton, right? Somebody who is running to the right of somebody who is basically trying to embrace more of the status quo that's going on and say that they're for generational change, when in reality, they're a guy that's almost 50 years old. I mean, come on, really? Like, is that really generational change? And aren't really bringing any new ideas to the table. And I think if moderates, if I could give one piece of advice to moderates, it's ask yourself, what are your actual values? What is the vision that you're actually trying to pitch to the American people that's different? Because the status quo is not working anymore. And the message that you guys end up with more often than not is one where you sound like, when you say that you're constantly the center, it sounds like you're for the status quo. And regardless of whether or not there's people on the left or the right in American politics, the one thing that pretty much all voters can agree on is what is going on right now is not working. And the status quo is not the answer.
I think you're 100% right. Many a man has called you the most vindicated person in politics recently. I've seen those tweets out there. I always appreciate the work that you're doing, man. LeadersWeDeserve.com. Go and support. David, thank you so much for joining me, brother.
Thanks so much, Jack.
Fantastic to be joined by my friend David Hogg. His organization, Leaders We Deserve, is doing really incredible work. Just so commendable the way that David has put himself out there and really led the charge in this Trump 2 era. And he's led the charge not just against the president and not just those in the establishment, also some assholes on TV. And why I mention that is because we are awarding one of those assholes on TV, who David Hogg has gone up against, with the Idiot of the Week. Because this week's Idiot of the Week, it's the guy who CNN pays to humiliate himself every night on television. David Hogg has humiliated him before. That's Scott Jennings. Jennings has been on a tear lately, losing arguments in a desperate bid to defend Donald Trump and other Republicans while making himself look beyond ridiculous. And we finally know why. Last week, when Senator Jon Ossoff said at a rally in Atlanta that Donald Trump doesn't want to do his job, he just wants to golf, manipulate the stock market, and that all he cares about is building monuments and quotes. And of course, this set off our news cycle, traveling with Natalie. Yes, of course, that's Natalie Harp, Donald Trump's obsession-style personal aide psycho, who follows him around, printing out nice articles for him and writing unhinged letters about how much she loves him and begging for his affection. Yeah, in response to that totally normal and justifiable comment from Senator Jon Ossoff, Scott Jennings ran to CNN and spouted off a ton of fake outrage about the phrase, traveling with Natalie. Again, he does travel with Natalie, and they both seem to really like it. But Jennings was losing his mind at the quote, saying the insinuation that the only possible reason she could have a job in politics is because she's a concubine for a politician. This is a real quote from Scott Jennings. He went on to call Ossoff a disgusting coward. Of course, thankfully, Laura Coates immediately pointed out that Ossoff never said anything remotely close to that. There was no insinuation. And this weird concubine fantasy came entirely from Jennings' own imagination. And you may think this hysterical outrage is just, business as usual. It's what Scott Jennings does. But what we just found out why he actually is coming out so hard for Trump on this specific issue. It's because he wants a job interview for Carolyn Levitt's old position. Politico reported that after this freakout that Scott Jennings had, he asked for a private meeting with Susie Wiles while sending those clips of himself defending Natalie, my God, to senior White House staff. He's building a resume by humiliating himself in Donald Trump's honor, which is actually the main qualification, it seems, for any role in Donald Trump's government. It's also worth reminding you that Jennings is the same person who claimed to have had a 20-minute conversation with Mitch McConnell about national security while he was almost certainly brain dead. He probably still is. But then he was in the hospital. Now he's just brain dead at home. And by the way, we still have not heard from Mitch in over 2 months because he's definitely not able to be heard from, especially Scott Jennings won't put him on the line. If you know what I mean, Mitch is just, he's just not there. I can't make an official decree, but I think we know what's going on. And after all that lying, back to Scott Jennings and hysteria and begging for a job by screwing up his chances for any employment in the future, here's what Trump had to say about Scott Jennings at a recent rally.
We have a man here that I don't know, but he's defending me all the time on CNN. And he defends me really well, but he can't go too far because if he goes too far, he'll get fired.
Pretty embarrassing for your claim to fame, being that the president says that he doesn't know you, but you're still his lapdog. But that's the story with most of Donald Trump lackeys. Their desperate attempts at relevancy in his eyes is at best a stepping stone to being betrayed and at worst a way to publicly humiliate yourself with no possible future. And in fact, Donald Trump hates the people who humiliate themselves for him because he finds them sad and pathetic. It's why he doesn't like J.D. Vance, and it's why he won't like Scott Jennings, even if he hires him, which at this point, who knows? I'm sure if he does, Scott will get the Botox and the filler. Scott is just yet another grifter who falls into the second category of a person willing to humiliate themselves without a future, and he will be barely remembered as a major, unrepentant, hypocritical idiot. Scott Jennings, you are the idiot of the week. I could probably dole it out to you most weeks, but this one in particular, boy, are you bad. But I'm glad that we have people in independent media willing to call out people like Scott Jennings. We will always be doing that on this show. We will be having a little bit of fun as well with what the mainstream media doesn't want to cover. We are going to make sure we bring light to the Natalie Harp saga. And that is because y'all have given us this incredible platform. I want to say a huge thank you, not just to the audience, but the Meidas Mighty broadly, and that includes the brothers, Brett, Ben, and Jordy, again, out with that great book. But that's why we are able to do the show, and it is why it is growing so much. So I want to say thank you to all of y'all. Thank you to my friends, Brett, Ben, and Jordy. Thank you to my 3 guests, Ben, of course, Sarah, and David. Thank you as well to my producer and good friend, Jules. We're doing an incredible job here on this show, and I'm so excited to keep growing it. And if you want to help us be a part of that, make sure you're tuning in every week because you know where to find us. It's right here. It's at noon. We go for about an hour and a half because we got a lot to talk about. It's me, it's you, it's always some great guests. And as always, it's happening on Sunday.